This is my first time at bat doing this, so we'll see if we can pull it off. Anyways, just by way of welcoming, I want to extend a warm welcome to you today. Everyone is welcome here. You are welcome here regardless of your age, your race, your income, your religion, or the gender with which you identify. You're welcome here regardless of who you love, who you vote for, the regrets that burden you, or the mistakes that you've made. In this safe community, we support each other in the sacred task of becoming, celebrating the transcending mystery of life, and rely on the transforming power of love. Here, we revere the words of the great teachers such as Jesus, the Buddha, and Confucius. It is, however, the task of every UU to be their own Buddha, their own Jesus, their own Confucius. It is a cornerstone of our religion that each of us is the author of their own life experience, and through the practice of loving kindness, we can heal our bodies, our minds, our spirits, and our planet. It is our work as a community to walk with each other along the spiritual pathways that lead to our happiness, compassion, and a life fully lived. And while we are a safe harbor where there is solace and healing, we are also a launching pad from which we are propelled into the tumult of life to live courageously, justly, and lovingly. In this sacred space, we create the structures that lift up the downtrodden, set the captives free, and heal the brokenhearted. We have learned that to be fully human is to be fully divine. And with a little bit of help from our friends, we can each tell our own unique story.
We kindle this chalice as a reminder of the flame of life that burns brightly in us all.
Okay, I have 2 minutes to discuss Passover, a Jewish holiday that is being celebrated right now throughout the Jewish world. Explaining all there is to say about Passover in 2 minutes would be quite a feat, because not only is the holiday over 2,000 years old, but Jewish scholars and rabbis have written, pontificated, and debated about the meaning of the rituals surrounding Passover during that entire time. And these discussions all add layers to its meaning. The main point of the holiday is to retell the story of the Israelites' escape from slavery with the help of Moses. This story provides the backbone of identity for Jewish people who are reminded constantly in the daily, weekly, and holiday services throughout the year that if not for this miracle, there would be no Jewish people. If you are not familiar with the story, just watch Cecil B. DeMille's movie, the great movie, The 10 Commandments. The movie tracks the Bible story pretty closely and tells you almost everything that you need to know. So I could end this right here, but I'm going to go on. Passover is celebrated in 2 main ways: during a ritual meal or Seder, where a Haggadah or user manual explains what symbols must appear on the table, and during which the Haggadah provides prompts for discussion. Most of the themes concern liberation and freedom. Rabbis disagree, of course, because that's the essence of being Jewish, disagreement. Does the story describe the Israelites' journey from slavery to freedom, or from idolatry to the worship of a single God? In any event, all agree the story starts with degradation and moves to glory, a winning and compelling formula that is not surprisingly the basis of so many Hollywood movies, including the 10 Commandments. The other main way to mark Passover is to eat matzah for 7 days and avoid all bread and bread byproducts. Matzah is meant to remind one of the haste with which the Israelites left Egypt so fast they only had time to make tasteless crackers to sustain them for the long voyage, and I brought some in today. This year's holiday could not avoid thoughts and discussions of the disasters unraveling throughout the world, and especially in the Middle East, where there has been so much unnecessary suffering and death as a result of hatred and war. It is hard to discuss themes of liberation and freedom this year without acknowledging the bitter irony in light of horrible current events. Matzah is also called the bread of affliction, not only because of the way it tastes. I brought some in case anybody would like to try the bread of affliction. Eating matzah is meant to remind us that empathy for all those who are suffering is required of us as human beings. I hope you have learned a little about Passover in these last 2 minutes. And feel free to share some matzah. I'm going to put it out there. And ask me questions if you have any, because that is the spirit of the holiday. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Every month we usually have it. I think we've changed it now to every third month. But whatever, this morning we will be talking about people who have left us over the years and who you'd like to talk about again, say a few words. It's really important that we remember the people that we left behind. Before I begin, I would like for all of us to think about all the people who are suffering now in Europe and other places who have died because they believe in love and caring and not wars and not the kinds of life that we are kind of experiencing right now. The chaos in the world is terrible, and people are dying, especially the children, which breaks my heart, and I'm sure yours too. So, with further state talking, I would like to invite anybody who has somebody in their life that they really want to say something about, who want to hear them with voices, want to hear the sound. So please come up. And I would like you, after you say what you have to say, to count to. Also, when somebody says the name of somebody, we say, and you say, I weave the thread in the fabric of life, in remembrance of, and then after they say that, we say presente, which means that we've accepted your thought.
It was with great sadness that I learned this week that Tim Foley died. Tim Foley was the former owner of Bit of Swiss Bakery, and about 11 years ago, he opened Bread Bar, a wonderful restaurant in Benton Harbor. And my son, Ian, has been mentored and loved by Tim for 10 years. Ian started at Bread Bar 10 years ago when he was 17 as a food runner, and he's worked his way up through the restaurant, and he's now the head and really only bartender. And Tim was very, very influential in my son's life, and it just breaks my heart to see how much Ian is hurting over the loss of this really great and kind man who was a visionary and really made a difference in our community with his bakery and his wonderful restaurant. So I weave this thread into the fabric of our life in remembrance of Tim Foley.
I just want to take a moment and remember our dear friend Carolton. We used to call her Grandma Carol. She was always there for me and my kids. And she passed away after a battle with cancer. And she was ready to go. So she's at rest now. But also just as sad. My son, Matt, I know this is for people, but they lost their dog of 11 years. And he died in my son's arms the other night, rather suddenly. So I know this is for humans, but pets are such a part of our fabric of our lives. So I'd like to remember Cooper as well. So Carol too. So I weave this thread in the fabric of our life in remembrance of Carolton as Grandma Carol and Cooper.
I'd like to honor my mother's cousin, Mary Louise Longo, who passed away after a long battle with pancreatic cancer recently. And she was a fixture of our Italian-American families out on the East Coast. And I spent a lot of time with her when I lived in Philadelphia for graduate school. And this last summer, I had the privilege of taking my parents to see her, which would be one last time. And she got to meet Zelda, and she just had a wonderful spirit. And we thought we would go into that day having a really sad time, but we had a really beautiful, wonderful time. So I weave this thread in the fabric of our life in remembrance of Mary Louise Longo.
I've done this one before, but yesterday marked 15 years since my father, Mark Fuller, died. Some of you may know he was the first president of this congregation 65 years ago. So I weave this thread in the fabric of our lives from Mark Fuller.
The grandson of one of my cousins died this past week. My dad, Steve, died many years ago, but I just want to say that how much I loved him and how much he loved me. And one time he signed a little photo of himself and wrote on, he always called me Charlie, and he said on the back of the photo, "Dear Charlie, you know you can reach me anytime you need me." I just love him so much.
If there aren't any more, we will remember all those that are unspoken here today, but are in your hearts and in your minds. And for all the people throughout the world that we must keep in our hearts and in our minds, because it's not the best place to be right now, and we have to make it better. And the best way we can do that is to be aware always of what is going on, how much we are needed, and how much we love this world. So please be aware of everything that's going on today, and let us take care of those people, the live ones and the ones that we have left behind. So thank you.
My dog, Oscar, last week when I was thinking about a story to tell you all, I came across a story about a little dog who was grumpy with other dogs to get them to do what he wanted. It then occurred to me that I don't need to talk about a fictional dog when I have a very grumpy little dog at home. His name is Oscar the Grouch. He was named that by his first owners when he was a puppy because he growled at them when he wanted them to take him for a walk or play fetch with him. He even growled when he wanted to be held in their laps. Oscar's first owners decided that they could live with Oscar's grumpiness until they had a new baby. Oscar did not like the new baby. He saw the baby being held and lavished with attention that he thought that he should have for himself. So he did a lot of growling and barking. Oscar's owners decided that they would have to give Oscar away. The trouble is, nobody wanted Oscar. He was just too grumpy. Oscar's owners then reluctantly decided that they would have to take Oscar to the veterinarian to be put down. My daughter Katie heard about what was planned for Oscar. She called her mother and me and told us what an unpleasant little dog Oscar could be. She asked if we would be interested in giving Oscar a home, since we had lost our dog several months before. We figured that since we had raised 4 kids through their teenage years, that we were used to a lot of grumpiness. So we brought Oscar to our house. We really like Oscar, even though he is a grumpy little punk. He does things like ambushing me while I am eating and snatching things off my plate or stealing my napkin, which he then tears to pieces in front of me. If I make a move to retrieve the napkin, Oscar will growl at me like a junkyard dog. Also, Oscar has a very nice bed that we bought at PetSmart for him to sleep on. Yet most mornings around 2 o'clock, Oscar comes into bed with me. He is so pushy that by morning I only have about 6 inches of bed on which to sleep. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and Oscar is laying beside me in such a way that I realize that I have been breathing dog breath. This is very disgusting. I feel like I should wash my mouth out with laundry detergent. The next time I go to my doctor, I'm going to ask her about the health effects of breathing dog breath. Oscar has been with us over a year now, and we love him very much, even if he is a grumpy little punk. Now, here's the thing. Here's where the sermon comes in. Who here, and I want you to raise your hand. I want you to raise your hands right now. I'm talking about the kids now. Who here has, within the last week, been a grumpy little punk? Okay, we got some. Your dog has? Okay, yeah, okay. So now the thing is that between Oscar and you guys is, Oscar doesn't have a choice about it. Oscar is just kind of instinctually bred to be a grumpy little punk. But you guys do have a choice. And in fact, there's a religion called Buddhism. How many people here have heard of Buddhism, the religion of Buddhism? Yeah, a few people have, a little bit, yeah. In Buddhism, they have the idea of loving kindness. And the idea about loving kindness is that next time you feel like being grumpy, you can say, wait a minute, I don't want to be grumpy. I want to practice loving kindness. So loving kindness works better. You'll feel better about yourself, and probably the person that you were being grumpy towards will feel better too. So anyway, you guys, let's sing the kids out, and thank you all.
Don't be alarmed by the fact that I have 12 pages of notes. I promise Braille is large. They say that April is the cruelest month. T.S. Eliot said that. Aside from the fact that it is the beginning of the baseball season and many of us repose absolutely illusory hope that our team, be it the Tigers, the White Sox, the Cubs, whatever your favorite team is, or, some weird team like the Braves, who knows, will achieve something this year. They probably won't, because April's cruel. It's also been a hard month for prominent figures of American history, some of whom are held to be heroes in our national mythology. On April 14th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln is shot and dies in the small hours of the next morning by an extremist who sought thereby to change the outcome of the Civil War. In American myth, he is the leader who freed the slaves and who held the Union together through the horrors of the Civil War. On April 12th, 1945, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, wartime president and longest-serving president, dies in Warm Springs of a massive stroke. He's held to be a hero by many because of his leadership through the Great Depression. One of the very early things he said in his radio addresses was, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and to a nation shaken to its core by economic collapse. This was a message of hope. He also led our nation through the Second World War. And of course, on April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King is assassinated in Memphis in a tumultuous year that would bring riots and chaos and political storms, a convention marred by demonstrations in Chicago. Gosh, might that happen again? Dr. King is held as a hero for his leadership of the civil rights movement, for becoming the voice of that movement. Why do we call these men, these people, heroes? Certainly they exerted leadership in extraordinary times. They, each in their own way, preached the idea and a belief in that there was a way of doing things that could lift people up who were downtrodden. Lincoln's decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, a matter of political expediency, also was the thing that began the irrevocable process of ending slavery in the United States. And his championing of the 13th Amendment codified that ending. Roosevelt presided over the New Deal, a raft of legislation that has forever changed the role of government, so that at its best, it is an engine for sharing burdens in a way that is meant to reduce poverty, bring equality, and actually serve the American dream. The American labor movement came into its own during his presidency, not always peacefully, it must be said, but it is still the case that, it is still the case that it is when this happened. And of course, he led us into and through the most destructive war in our or the world's history. Dr. King rose from being an obscure pastor into being the symbol of an entire movement of people seeking to throw off the shackles of Jim Crow and the other sequels of the Civil War that haunted the landscape of the 1950s and 1960s America. His personal courage in the face of numerous death threats and even blackmail perpetrated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation is remarkable. On the night before his assassination, he spoke about this during his last speech before a crowd in Memphis, Tennessee, where he'd gone to bring his prestige to a strike by sanitation workers as part of his Poor People's Campaign. He talked about that he might not get there with you, but that he had seen the mountaintop in that incredible voice of his. So heroes are giants in their lifetimes and after. They are the subject of national myth or of identity myth, which often obscures as much as it lightens once they are dead and the history becomes myth. Both Lincoln and Roosevelt may well have committed gross abuse of their presidential powers in the service of their higher goals. Dr. King is not remembered for his championing of the rights of the poor in the last 4 years of his life, so much as he is remembered for having a dream in Washington. We've sanitized versions of these people's stories that allow us to feel good about the genius of American culture, which has produced such people. We do not like to think about the uncomfortable parts of their legacy, about Dr. King's womanizing, or in fact, his championing of the rights of all poor people in a way that some people thought was pro-communist. We do not like to think of the suspension of habeas corpus under the Lincoln administration, or the fact that Roosevelt wanted to pack the Supreme Court. Gosh, that sounds familiar. The myths are huge and daunting if we look at our smaller lives and wonder how we would measure up. Are we heroes? Can we be heroes? We're small. We're not giants. Are we waiting for another hero to come and make all right and comfort us through the anxiety of these days? There is another way. There is another heroism. And fair warning to those of you who don't know me well, as you come to know me, you will recognize that I will talk about J.R.R. Tolkien at any excuse. So we're going to talk a little bit about Tolkien and his most famous work, The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien was no stranger to heroic literature. He cut his teeth learning the languages of the Icelandic sagas so that he could read the stories in the original. He read widely and then taught the legends of the northern peoples. I think there was a point early in his writing career where he desired to create a mythology for England, a grand overarching sort of national myth that would contain the sort of heroes that we Americans make out of Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Dr. King. This is a notion that he later dismissed as absurd in a very famous letter. And over the course of time, his focus changed. While one certainly can find epic heroes in The Lord of the Rings, I'm thinking of Aragorn or Boromir or Éomer, all of which would be perfectly comfortable in the very sort of northern sagas he was interested in. They are not the focus of this great work of English literature. Instead, we have hobbits. And hobbits are just about as far from world-spanning heroes or even machine gun-toting vigilantes out for vengeance for personal wrongs as we often see in our current cultural context. Tolkien tells us in the introduction to Lord of the Rings that hobbits are not warlike. Well, can you be a hero and not? They haven't made a huge mark on their world before the story opens, being known only for inventing pipe smoking and perhaps the game of golf, something that seems to have come about when a rather adventurous hobbit of the past knocked the head off a goblin and it went into a rabbit hole, as we read in The Hobbit. No, that's literally in there. It's in the first chapter, if you haven't read it or you've forgotten. Anyway, they love peace and quiet and good tilled earth. These are hardly the people from whom one expects to find heroes emerging. And yet, it is Frodo and Samwise, one a hobbit of modest means and no particular distinction, one, his faithful and rather parochial, narrow-minded servant, whose labors end up saving their world. Oh, spoiler alert, sorry. Such questions cannot be answered, said Gandalf in response to Frodo early in the story asking, "Why have I been chosen?"
You may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess, not for power or wisdom at any rate. But you have been chosen, and you must therefore use such strength and wits as you have.
That will be my last Ian McKellen impression. I apologize. As the story continues, it becomes clear that Frodo is in fact the perfect and probably the only one who can fulfill the quest he must fulfill to take a ring of absolute power and destroy it in contravention to everyone, including its maker, the evil Dark Lord's expectation. Because he lacks power and because of his humility, he is able to hold the ring in a way that no other character, including all of those wonderful heroic characters in Tolkien's work, could have done, because they would either fall to its lure and become themselves evil, or they would have to completely avoid taking the ring. Frodo's heroism is to take on an impossible quest, to take the ring into the very land of the Dark Lord, to the place of its making, and there throw it into a volcano. He will not succeed in the end, and the mission quest will only be accomplished through providence. He knows that he will not succeed, but he must do what is needed until he can't anymore, and then trust. Tolkien was very devout Catholic, and I think that this ending does reflect his belief in providence, which we may or may not necessarily share, but in the context of the story, it's important. Sam, his servant, is often considered by fans of Lord of the Rings to be the true hero of the piece, and with real justification. His heroism consists of loving Frodo unswervingly and putting all he is, his hopes of happiness, his physical safety, and even his spirit into the service of his friend and master's impossible quest. It begins with little things, little inconsequential things, it seems, like remembering to pack salt because Sam is a cook and he wants to make sure that there's good things for his master and friend to eat. Making sure there's rope when they need it, because when he forgot it, they did. Making sure that when Frodo decides he has to go off alone, Sam threatens to knock holes in all the boats they could use to cross the river if he doesn't go with him. And as the end of the quest approaches, and Frodo's body and mind begin to fail as he falls under the power at last of the evil ring, it is Sam who keeps them going. Not through any brilliance or anything, just through sheer grit and will, but that's built out of the small things. At one point, at the base of the volcano, they have to climb when Frodo clearly can't. We hear him say in an argument with himself, "I'll get there if I leave everything but my bones behind, and I'll carry Mr. Frodo up myself if it breaks my back and heart. So stop arguing." This is a declaration of will that brings tears to the eyes of many of us in the Tolkien fandom because of its impossible bravery. But here's the thing. If you think about it, you know someone in your life who would do that for someone else, maybe for you. It's not the huge heroic deed of an Aragorn or a Roosevelt. It's not the stirring speeches that came out of the mouth of Winston Churchill, that arch-racist and imperialist who was perfectly happy to countenance the death by famine of over 1 million residents of Bengal in 1943 to further his war effort. This is a small person, literally a small person. He's not even 4 feet tall, saying that there is something or someone who is worth hazarding all. A person like this looks for ways to comfort, to help others, even when no one is noticing or commenting. Sam does indeed get to hear the tale of his deeds and to be praised with great praise, but he is doing these things because they are needed and because someone he loves is in pain, is afraid, and is pitted against things that are too large for him. And so are we all. Glaciers are melting. Wars and the rumor of wars stalk the land. Children are being killed in the righteous conviction that it must be done to save one people from another. The corrupt use of power is rampant in nations that call themselves democracies. It's easy to fall into despair. But there is another way. I want to share a story about a time when Crystal and I were trying to find a way to give back, to make even a tiny difference in the world. Before the pandemic in Skokie, Illinois, there was a group that organized itself to try and find a way to deal with childhood trauma. Skokie has a high incidence of refugees, as it is a fairly welcoming multicultural community. English is not the only language one hears in its grocery stores, and the international food that's available is truly marvelous. It's also a place where there are many people who have come through the ravages of war or famine or other dislocation. This group, the Skokie Resilient Communities Collaborative, wanted to do something about it, to help these children deal with the aftermath of the adverse childhood events that they'd encountered. We know that childhood trauma has serious effects on the outcomes of those children. This caring group of professionals, therapists, social workers, doctors, educators, and two little old uncredentialed parents of children, us two, definitely the hobbits in that room, wanted to get the word out. So we participated in a 3-day training to give presentations to community organizations. The first 2 days were brutal. Broke my heart. We learned what we'd already known about the terrible effects of adverse childhood events on the lives of people, and that the responses that were often brought to bear were ineffective because we didn't know what to do. I'll tell you, by the end of the second day, I was kind of despairing. Then the third day came. And we did learn one thing that mattered. One small thing. And it's so simple. It's cheap. And it happens to be incredibly effective. The intervention of one adult, not part of the situation that's the cause of trauma. One auntie, one neighborhood person, one teacher, someone who didn't begin the cause of the trauma, but it makes a world of difference. And no dragons need be slain. No rightful kings need be put back on their thrones against the odds. No social systems of hatred or discrimination need be overthrown. But one child gets a better chance to be resilient from whatever has been done to them, has a chance at a better life. I am not ashamed to say that I was in tears after learning about this. It was something we could do. It was something we could teach. If one person could do this, would that not be enough to say that is a life well lived? A friend of mine wrote a book about the experience of being gender non-binary in the pagan world that often falls into a very gender binary trap that makes no space for those who do not fit naturally into the categories of men or women. People in this situation often feel isolated and are often not included in ways that matter. I asked her once why she wrote it. And she said, because this is a book I wish I had had when I was 15 and all alone. Her answer has rung in my head ever since, and is one of the reasons I have taken up the craft of writing myself, to tell stories that someone I will likely never meet who needs to read them, so that someone whom I will likely never meet who needs to read them will have them available to help fend off the darkness. So, friends, are you waiting for a hero? So are so many other people, including people you know and people you love. You don't need to captivate a nation or wage war on demonic forces. All that is required to be a hero in Tolkien's world is to see a need and fill that need. In your life, that might be making a phone call to someone who's lonely, or feeding someone who is hungry, or just saying, I see you and I love you, to someone who is on the point of giving in to despair. You can carry them for a little while, and it won't break your back and heart. We can speak truth to power. We can bring the words of voice. We can bring the words of voices into spaces where the people who have those voices aren't safe or comfortable to be. We can look around this gathering and ask, is there something you need that I can give? We can do the little things, and over time, the little things add up to an avalanche that changes the world in a way that heroes only dream of. Thank you.
We may extinguish this symbolic flame, but we remain ever mindful that the flame of life still burns in us, so that we might be guided by its light, warmed by its heat, and rely on its creative powers to heal the brokenhearted, set the captives free, and burn down the structures of evil.